Hello, students. We're going to be talking about crime victims and the study of victimology. When looking at victimology, we have to realize that scientific study of physical, emotional, and financial harm that people suffer due to illegal activities is what victimology is concerned with. Included in this definition is that victimization occurring for victims within the criminal justice system is what is frequently analyzed in criminal justice. There are statistics that are often able to be utilized to better understand how victims are influenced and what their role is in the criminal justice process. When looking at victimization, it is an asymmetrical interpersonal relationship that is abusive, painful, destructive, parasitical, and unfair at times. The law forbids certain forms of victimization, oppressive or exploitive acts, but not all types of harmful activities. And victimization can show up in many different types of ways. Victims are individuals who experience loss, injury, or hardship for any reason. Crime victims above as a result of an illegal act. So crime victims are separate from just the definition of victims because they've been victimized through an illegal action. There's also direct or primary. Those are experiences that the victim has with the criminal act and its consequences that are firsthand. And there's also indirect and secondary experiences where the family and those who suffer emotionally or financially are experiencing victimization but are not immediately involved or physically injured. The study of victimization scientifically, it's a subjective approach. Issues are approached from a standpoint of morality, ethics, philosophy, personalized reactions, and emotions. The objective approach requires the observer to be fair, open-minded, even-handed, dispassionate, neutral, and unbiased. Studying victimization scientifically, it is important to ask certain key questions, such as why should victimologists not be pro-victim? The ideal victim is a person who suffered harm, was weaker than the aggressor, acting virtuously or not looking for trouble or breaking any laws, and the wrongdoer was a stranger acting illegally and was unprovoked. From the perspective of the victimologist, there shouldn't be a bias either pro-victim or pro-perpetrator. And it's important to look at the totality of the circumstances and trying to make certain decisions and extrapolate certain data from what has happened. So victims or offenders. Who's the victim and who's the offender? It's not always clear. Sometimes you have criminal acts where both may be the offender or multiple individuals may be the offender, and the same individuals may also have been victimized. It's not always clear cut because crime and criminality can be messy, but consider the following: the subway vigilante, the Menendez brothers, the Bobics. Many of these individuals were victimized to the point that they became violent and retaliated. Criminals as victims. Predatory persons prey on each other. Organized crime may take out a contract hit. Drive-by shootings between two gangs. Drug deals gone bad where drug dealers kill each other. There's cycles of violence. A cycle of violence over time can transform a victim or victims into victimizers. A group of picked on students that may gang up against the bully. the battered wife that may launch a vengeful attack against the husband, the convicts, much more likely to have been abused physically or sexually as children. Violence begets violence, and oftentimes we see that in victimology and the study of victims, that those that have been violated and that have been victimized over time can at a point become the aggressor and the victimizer. Victims versus good guys. Victimologists do not limit their studies to clashes just between the victims and the offenders. They also consider what are the social reactions to victimization. Victims can be outraged by media coverage and the sensationalization of cases, and can also be traumatized to re experience their case as it's being portrayed in the media. The investigation of charges in high profile cases require victimologists to be detached and disinterested in carrying out analysis. Sometimes victimology is given a bad reputation. Victimology during the 1990s into the 20th century has become to many a dirty word. A critic of contemporary feminism declared on national TV that they hate victimology and despise a victim centered view of the universe. Some critics feel that this is not worth studying, and why look at the victim's standpoint or what happens with the victim? We should be studying the criminals. So that's one perspective on victimology. Victimology is a new academic discipline that only means the study of victims. It is focused on the research about the people that are harmed by criminals and how the crimes may have impacted them and those that surround them. It does not impose a partisan view or a point of view or a set or predictable bias that has certain conclusions. The ideology of victimism is a coherent, integrated set of beliefs that shapes interpretations and leads to political action. Do not confuse victimism with victimology. Victimological research must tell the whole truth, regardless of who's disappointed or insulted. Three types of biases that undermine the ability of a social scientist to achieve objectivity include so there's three types of bias. One may arise from personal experience, taking the form of an individual preference or certain prejudices that will lead it. Derives from the history of the discipline itself. Pioneers in the study of victimology first introduced the concept of victim blaming. Today, the majority of victimologists are pro victim. A subtle bias that's traced back to the mood of the times. So, in the 60s and 70s, a demand for government to devise ways to help victims get back on their feet financially, medically, and emotionally was common. In the 80s, there was a theme of self reliance and a reduction in government social spending and tax cutting that gained popularity. So, what are some of the origins of victimology? It provides highlights of the brief history of victimology, victim assistance, significant gains in the United States when the President's Commission on Law Enforcement and Administration of Justice urged criminologists to pay more attention to victims. By the 1970s, victimology became a recognized field of study. By 1990, 240 colleges and universities began to offer courses in victimology, allowing students to learn more about this particular area. And most states passed crime victim rights amendments to their state constitutions. And much of that was also because of the lobbying of crime victims and advocates on their behalf. In 2004, Congress enacted the Crime Victims' Rights Act, which provides for fair treatment and opportunities for input in federal court proceedings. So, how do we compare victimology with criminology? Victimology is best viewed as an area of specialization within criminology. Criminology embraces the scientific study of crimes, criminals, criminal law, and the criminal justice system, looking at societal reactions and crime victims. Criminologists ask why certain individuals become involved in lawbreaking while others do not. Victimologists ask why some individuals, households, and entities are targeted while others are not, and why over and over again. Criminologists apply their findings to devise crime prevention strategies. Victimologists use patterns and trends to develop victimization prevention strategies and risk reduction tactics. Both criminologists and victimologists study how the criminal justice system actually works versus how it is supposed to work. And there's certain boundaries. Boundaries are clear cut for criminology, but the boundaries for victimology are still unclear. There's also an overlap due to lack of boundaries where crime rates versus victimization rates are often compared. There's divisions within the discipline, so political ideologies shape policy recommendations. So whether an individual is conservative, liberal, or radical, their particular views on victimization and what should be done according to victimology are going to be different. The conservative influence focuses on basically street crime, everyone to be held accountable for their decisions and actions. There's an emphasis on self-reliance and not government, so potentially, um, target hardening and individuals being armed in case that there is violence or a violent crime that they have to deal with. Individual responsibility for preventing, avoiding, resisting, and recovering from criminal acts, and strictly punish offenders on behalf of their victims. When looking at the liberal influence, the scope of the field to extend beyond street crime, there's an endorsing of government intervention, extending the safety net mechanisms for all kinds of misfortunes, and looking to wrongdoers repaying their victims to allow for reconciliation. Divisions within the discipline when looking at the radical or critical or conflict influence. Victimization is a result of the oppressive social system in this perspective, and the scope of the field to include industrial polluters, hazardous workplaces, fraudulent advertisers, brutally violent law enforcement agencies, poverty, malnutrition, and family dysfunction, unemployment, and substance abuse. These are social problems of which the criminal justice system is part of the problem. So victimologists explore the interactions between victims, offenders, victims and the criminal justice system, and victims in society. There's a four-step process the victimologists follow in carrying out their research. Step one is to identify, define, and describe the problem. Step two is to measure the true dimensions of the problem, figure out the scope of the problem. Step three is to investigate how victims are handled, and step four is to gather evidence to test a hypothesis. And these are some of the key terms you're going to see in victimology and throughout the course. Victim, victimization, victimology, direct and primary victims, survivors, indirect or secondary victims, the subjective approach, objectivity, sensationalism, victimism, ideology, criminology, post-traumatic stress disorder, best practices, just desserts, bullying, likability rating, Stockholm syndrome, incident rates, prevalence rates, lifetime likelihoods, profile, and needs assessment.